Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, my name is Anna. I'm a clinical psychology doctorate student, and here on this channel, I make videos about real-life applications to psychology. So go ahead and hit like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification button. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about setting and maintaining boundaries. I think this is a really important topic. I know you guys have been asking for it ever since I came out with my emotional blackmail video. Some of you were wondering, well, what's the difference between emotional blackmail and setting boundaries, which is a super important distinction. So I think the first really important component to setting boundaries is to find a neutral time to do so. So we're not talking about mid-argument or when the person who you want to set the boundary with is already doing something that goes against your boundary. We're talking about as neutral as possible, preferably in a pretty pleasant moment, like after dinner. You could take them aside and say something like, hey, there's something I want to talk to you about. Do you have a moment? And you don't have to be mean or aggressive about it. You can communicate yourself calmly and politely, and your chances of getting through to them that way will be higher. And your chances of getting through to them will also be higher if you're not in a moment where they're more emotionally activated, such as mid-argument. So you've done this and you sat down with them, and how do you start? So you state your needs or expectations or boundaries clearly, and you state the consequences of what happens when those boundaries are not respected. So for example, I need to be with someone who doesn't forget to text me for days at a time. Your recent actions suggest to me that you have not been doing so. If this behavior continues, I can only assume that we're not a good fit and we will need to break up. So be careful not to use wishy-washy language or language that makes you sound unsure of yourself or unassertive. For example, this would be more wishy-washy. I'd like for you to text me back faster. If you can't do that, I worry about our relationship. I'd like is not the same as I need. It doesn't suggest that this is absolutely a boundary for you that they need to respect. It kind of gives the sense that there's a little bit of leeway for them to overstep their boundary. Faster is very vague. How fast is faster? What does that exactly mean? And I worry about our relationship? Also very vague, not concrete, doesn't clearly state the consequence of them not respecting your boundary, so they're less likely to uphold it. When you're doing all this, make sure to not be emotionally blackmailing the other person. So you can see my video on emotional blackmail to see what exactly that means. But the issue is that it sounds very similar to boundary setting in the if you do this, then this consequence will happen format. Where they differ is that boundaries are about getting your needs met, not about controlling or punishing someone else's behavior. So if there is a punishment or a negative consequence as a result of their behavior, it's not because you want to punish them. It's because you are taking whatever steps you need to protect yourself. So for example, if you don't text me back faster, I'll stop talking to you, sounds more like emotional blackmail because it sets them up to view a punishment to their actions rather than to understand your needs and how their actions affect your well-being. It's tricky because at the end of the day, how people behave inevitably affects the people around them, and you have a right to impose consequences to certain behaviors. So it might be a personal boundary for you to not be okay with someone else's behavior, and this is arguably a form of control. But where boundaries differ from emotional blackmail is that the purpose is not to control someone else's behavior, only to take the steps you need in order to ensure your well-being. So the consequences of someone not respecting your boundaries should be an action that you take for yourself, not for the other person. So let me give an example. Stonewalling someone, like giving them a taste of their own medicine because they didn't text you back, and ignoring them so that they make desperate attempts at reconciling and taking all the responsibility, that is a form of punishment, arguably a form of emotional blackmail. But simply blocking someone's number after they've refused to live up to your boundaries is not to punish them, it's to preserve yourself. Another really important component when setting and maintaining boundaries is to expect a level of boundary testing. So where there's boundary setting, there's going to be more likely than not boundary testing as well. And this is when the other person kind of tries to see, is this person bluffing? Are they serious about going through with this consequence if I take this step? And they kind of want to see how much they can get away with and not get the consequence that you've communicated to them. So using the same example as before, what do you do if you've told the person you're dating that you will not tolerate being ignored for days at a time, and they do it again? If this is someone you're not really invested in and you absolutely think this is the last straw, then by all means go through with your boundary and say, no, I stated this once and a second boundary testing is not going to happen, so I'm cutting this short right now. So you could say, hey Mark, just wanted to let you know I don't think we're a good fit. I wish you the best, but please don't contact me again. If this is someone you have history with and don't want to, stop communicating with them right away, you can only really communicate your boundary one more time before you're going to look like you were bluffing. So you can say, Mark, I've expressed fairly clearly that I'm not okay with being ignored for days at a time. This is the last time I'm going to state my boundary. Another really important component to boundary maintaining is to enforce the consequences consistently, not intermittently. So, for example, if your mom always yells at you when she gets mad, you can say, Mom, it makes me feel really anxious and unheard when you yell. I need to do what's best for me when that happens, and in that moment, what's best for me means removing myself from that situation. But I need you to understand this. Every time you yell at me, I'm going to have to leave the room. So let's say that your mom still yells at you the next time she gets mad. Then what? You leave the room every single time. It's essentially behavior modification. So you're training someone to understand that producing X always leads to Y consequence, and that there will not be any single circumstance under which X does not produce Y. Because if you do it intermittently, that person is more likely to be confused, less likely to really think that you're being serious about this, less likely to really get the pattern that every time they do this, they're going to have a consequence that they're not going to like. So what if the other person makes you feel bad for enforcing your boundaries or for even stating your boundaries? Well, that's a pretty good indicator that they either don't like that your boundary is something they don't want to act on, or they know that deep down that they can't live up to your boundary, or they just don't think you even deserve to have a boundary. And all of those are frankly unacceptable. So if someone gaslights you or makes you feel bad for setting and enforcing your boundaries, that is probably not the type of person that you should have in your life. Of course, that is always your choice. I would really ask you to reconsider that your boundaries are valid and your boundaries don't need to be lowered for people. Don't let people shame you into lowering your expectations for their behavior. And if it is a super outlandish, out there boundary, talk to people, ask them, do you think I'm being unreasonable? But if the vast majority of people say, no, this is a pretty reasonable thing to want, there's nothing wrong with standing your ground and saying, okay, you don't want to respect my boundary, I'm not sure there's a place for you in my life. So those are my 2 cents on boundary testing and maintaining. It's a pretty simple process in my opinion. Let me know if you have any other questions, and don't forget to like and subscribe and stay safe.